He's ancient Egypt's mystery man, a 3,000-year-old mummy found in a secret cache with some of Egypt's most famous pharaohs. Yet he's got no name, no identity at all. And his body shows shocking signs of mistreatment, even sacrilege. Now a team of scientists turned detectives attempt to crack this mysterious case. Was he a human sacrifice? A murder victim? Or a traitor sentenced to death? What are the secrets of Egypt's mystery mummy? In the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, he's known simply as Unknown Man E. Others call him the anti-mummy. He's almost the opposite of what an Egyptian mummy should be. Instead of life eternal, it seems someone condemned him to oblivion. And from everything we know about ancient Egypt, his fate was no accident.
This is amazing. Unknown Man E.
Dr. Salima Ikram has examined countless Egyptian mummies. She's never seen one like this.
This person had no name on him and also was not mummified at all, or at least not in a conventional way.
He's got no identity at all. His body indicates he was less than 25 years old when he died.
His teeth are very, very well preserved, which would suggest that he was young.
But what most disturbs many who first look at Unknown Man E is his face. Other mummies look composed, confident, seemingly ready for the perilous journey to the afterlife. Unknown Man E's face appears frozen at the very moment of a torturous death. For more than a century, Egyptologists have wondered who this man was and what he did to deserve such an unusual fate. The search for answers begins in Egypt's Valley of the Kings, where Unknown Man E was discovered more than 120 years ago. 1871. Shepherd Ahmed El Razul is tending his goats. One goat strays. Ahmed follows. And he happens upon a shaft leading deep into a cave below. He descends and is stunned by what he sees. It's a thieves' paradise, countless rare and priceless antiquities. It's the funerary cache of many pharaohs. It also contains the remains of the kings themselves. Quietly, Razul and his brothers begin to raid the cache. They sell papyri, funerary vessels, and possibly one royal mummy on the black market. But they leave the rest of the royals behind. And they never even open one plain, unmarked coffin, the resting place of the most mysterious mummy of all. The Razuls rob the cache piece by piece for 10 years before a sting operation nabs them. In exchange for leniency, one brother agrees to lead authorities to the hidden chamber. To Egyptologist Emile Bruch, it's an overwhelming discovery. More than 40 royal coffins sealed away for 3,000 years. From their inscriptions, Bruch can tell they contain the remains of some of Egypt's most famous pharaohs. There's the warrior Tutmosis III. Perhaps ancient Egypt's greatest king, Ramses II, and its last truly powerful ruler, Ramses III. These pharaohs had long been missing from their original tombs. Many Egyptologists thought they were lost forever. Yet for Bruce, that's not the end of the mystery. He also finds one coffin that stands out not for its splendor, but for its simplicity. Not only did the Rasul brothers leave it untouched, in 3,000 years, no thieves have ever disturbed it. It's the beginning of the baffling case of unknown man E. It's also the first clue to his identity. Whoever he was important enough to be mummified and entombed with royals. In ancient Egypt, mummification was the highest honor, usually reserved for kings, nobles, and others of enormous wealth. For them, death is not final. It's just a brief stop on the road to eternal life.
For the ancient Egyptians, this life segued into the afterlife, and in fact, the afterlife could be a better version of the life they had here.
The belief springs from an ancient Egyptian myth. According to the legend, Egypt's first pharaoh, Osiris, was slain by a jealous brother. The jackal-headed god Anubis mummified Osiris. His spirit re-entered his body. He was reborn and went on to rule forever over the underworld. Over time, the Egyptians came to believe that once they were mummified and buried, just like Osiris, they would join the gods in the hereafter and enjoy eternal life. Unknown man E was not mummified and buried in the traditional way, and that meant he might never reach the afterlife. Today, more than a century after unknown man E was found, archaeologists are excavating his final resting place. The vast tomb, 40 feet below ground, once held some 50 coffins, most of them royal. Egyptologist Dylan Bickerstaff believes it may still hold clues to the mystery mummy's identity.
This mummy would be odd enough on its own, but with all the kings and queens, it is genuinely unnerving. How did he end up, this strange-looking figure, this unnamed figure, end up in this tomb with all these royalty?
Archaeologist Erhard Graef leads the excavation. Over the years, floodwaters have washed through the tomb and filled it with rubble. Yet Graef and his team have found bits and pieces of wood and linen throughout, remnants of the coffins and mummies hidden here for 3 millennia.
Yes, linen.
This is mummy linen.
The fragments might hold answers to why unknown man E was also entombed here.
Let's say pieces detached from coffin.
I often wondered if there might be some indication of who he was associated with.
Yes, there must be some reason to bury him with kings.
Graef thinks unknown man E was buried elsewhere with one of the royals. Then both were moved here.
Presumably he was somebody of importance. Maybe he was preserved with relatives. Maybe he was related to one of the great kings.
Unknown man E was likely a royal, or at least someone of very high status. Yet he was buried without a name.
That's the one thing that really sort of gets to everybody. If only we could name this man.
It's a chilling omission. Ancient Egypt's royals had their names inscribed everywhere. On their monuments, their tombs, their coffins, sometimes even on their linen wrappings. They wanted their status to be recognized in the afterlife, so they could continue to live there as well as they had on Earth. 3,000 years later, we can still identify many of them. But not Unknown Man E. Neither his mummy nor his coffin bear any inscriptions, not a single word. His anonymity could be another clue to his identity.
The fact that the coffin's unnamed, his bandages are unnamed, suggests that either they didn't want him to carry a name into eternity, or that they didn't know who he was.
Bickerstaff would love to know exactly where the mystery mummy was found and which mummies were nearby. But those questions will have to wait. The men who moved Unknown Man E destroyed crucial evidence.
Yeah, I mean, it was an archaeological disaster when Bruges cleared the tomb. I mean, he cleared it in 48 hours. He didn't make any plans or any records.
1881. Egyptologist Emile Bruges fears news of his find will attract tomb raiders. He makes a disastrous decision. He orders workers to clear the tomb immediately and send everything to the Bulaq Museum in Cairo. He makes no records of what was found where. It's a critical mistake. It wipes away important clues to Unknown Man E's identity. The nameless mummy is stowed on a shelf where he might have been forgotten, had he been unremarkable in every other way. But when museum officials decide to take a closer look, they find the strangest mummy they've ever seen. Cairo, Egypt, 1886, 5 years after the mystery mummy was discovered. Now, Dr. Daniel Fouquet, a chemist, Mr. Mathy, and Gaston Maspereau, head of Egypt's Antiquities Authority, are about to unwrap him. They immediately spot clues to his identity. He's cocooned in the finest linen, a sign he was well-to-do. His coffin, although plain and unmarked, is of expensive cedar. As they proceed, the scientists uncover even more evidence of his elite rank, including gold earrings. But it's also clear this mummy received a burial that would have horrified a royal Egyptian. His outer shroud is made of sheepskin.
This is very unusual. It was considered ritually unclean by the Egyptians to be buried in a sheepskin.
A few hours into their work, Dr. Fouquet peels back the mummy's last layers. The stench of decay fills the room. It's not the mild, musty odor of a typical Egyptian mummy. And there's more. Egyptians are usually dark-haired. This mummy's hair appears light, almost blonde. And the chemicals used to embalm him still coat his skin. The chemist Mathy takes a sample of the coating. What the unwrappers observe next truly surprises them. The mummy's arms, hands, and feet are bound. The straps were pulled so tight, they left marks on his skin. Is it a sign of foul play? There's also the disturbing look on the mummy's face. The chemist Mathy considers it telling evidence.
Never did a face relay more faithfully a scene of the most poignant and unspeakable agony.
Even with tests still to complete, Mathy draws an ominous conclusion.
The features, horribly convulsed, almost certainly indicate that this unhappy person had succumbed to deliberate asphyxia, very probably by being buried alive.
If Unknown Man E was buried alive, it's a discovery of enormous significance. There must be a reason he was killed in such a fashion. He may have been a human sacrifice. Some ancient cultures did bury people alive, either as a gift for a god or even a king. The Incas of South America sacrificed children. On the peaks of the Andes Mountains, archaeologists have unearthed the 500-year-old mummies of these sacrifices. They were usually the sons and daughters of noble families. Many were not yet teenagers. Priests led the children to the very top of the mountain. There, they wrapped them in ceremonial clothing, placed them in a tomb, and left them to die. Unknown Man E shows signs of a similar fate. Still, many have long doubted that the ancient Egyptians practiced human sacrifice. Now, evidence unearthed in an ancient Egyptian necropolis is proving them wrong. Abydos was once Egypt's most sacred burial ground. The Egyptians began entombing their dead here 5,000 years ago, 2,500 years before they built the Great Pyramid. Among the thousands of graves, archaeologists have found the tombs of the first pharaohs. Matt Adams has excavated around these tombs. And the evidence he's uncovered reveals a dark side to the early Egyptians that no one ever suspected.
Each one of these graves was built inside a great pit that was dug into the desert.
The graves were dug all at once, and they were filled all at once.
This gray, crumbly material is actually mud plaster, and this mud plaster was laid down after these tombs were sealed over the whole area.
As Adam sees it, there's only one conclusion to draw.
These people did not die one by one, and were not placed in their tombs one by one as they died naturally. All of these graves were closed and sealed at exactly the same time.
They did not die naturally. It was a mass execution. The king's servants, noble retainers, even members of his own family, were killed and buried so that they could accompany their master to the afterlife and continue to serve him. Archaeologist Günter Dreyer has unearthed hundreds of these sacrificial victims.
Another skull is coming to light, and it seems to be the skull of a very young person. You see the rib here? It's very small, so it's a child, yeah, maybe 10 years about.
Every one of the victims Dreyer has unearthed was young, none older than 25.
Very young.
Unknown Man E also died before he turned 25. His body shows no marks of violence. His early examiners concluded he suffocated inside his shroud. Like Unknown Man E, the bodies at Abydos show no signs of violent death. But it's unlikely they were buried alive. Matt Adams believes they were killed before they were entombed.
It's possible that they were either poisoned outright or that they were drugged and asphyxiated.
And that's not the only difference. Unlike our mystery mummy, no one at Abydos was mummified. The Egyptians had not yet perfected the practice. And the evidence also shows that human sacrifice ended here soon after it began.
The Egyptians realized that the price was too high. Some of the best and brightest were being lost, and they simply couldn't afford to continue sacrificing these people to go with the king.
We don't know precisely when Unknown Man E died, but he was found with kings who reigned more than 1,000 years after those buried at Abydos. And he was mummified, another sign he lived much later. What's more, those sacrificed at Abydos were given food and other things they'd need in the afterlife. They even had inscriptions bearing their names. Unknown Man E was not so lucky. It's clear our mystery mummy was not a human sacrifice. But could he still have been buried alive? If he was mummified and entombed alive, the pain must have been excruciating. It could explain his agonized expression and his tightly bound limbs. Compare his corpse to the frozen mummies of the Inca children. They're hunched over, as if trying to keep warm. While Unknown Man E's face screams horror, his body shows no sign of struggle. He's dead calm. Buried alive? Probably not.
There's no way he was lying there, suffocating slowly. It's not possible. He was already dead, long dead before all that.
The mystery remains. The Egyptians wanted their bodies to stay as pristine as possible after death. Yet Unknown Man E's corpse was treated in a way a royal Egyptian would find highly disrespectful, even sacrilegious. The oddities are not just on the surface. The deeper the experts look, the more bizarre his case becomes.
The brain hasn't been removed the way it is traditionally removed. There is no evisceration, so all of his internal organs are still inside the body.
It's a far cry from how Egyptians normally mummified the dead. In ancient Egypt, mummification was a secret and sacred art. The embalmers spent thousands of years perfecting their technique, and they never wrote down exactly what they did. But Egyptologist Bob Breyer has figured out how this important ritual was performed.
The body was literally going to resurrect, so you had to preserve it. So all your money, all your thought went into preserving your body.
Breyer has gathered exact replicas of the embalming tools the ancients used. Now he's going to test his theories. He's going to mummify an actual human corpse. Dr. Breyer will embalm the body just as the ancient Egyptians did. His mummy will be an elderly man who donated his body. Breyer begins by removing the internal organs. The first to go is the brain. The ancients removed the brain through the nose to avoid damaging the face. The mystery mummy's embalmers left his brain inside. Next, Breyer makes an incision on the left side of the abdomen, just like the Egyptians. He removes the lungs, stomach, liver, and intestines. Another step Unknown Man E's embalmers ignored.
I sort of thought, well, I don't know if you can get it out whole, but I think you might be able to.
Like the ancient embalmers, Breyer will leave the heart, considered the most vital organ, inside.
This is the palm wine. Here it goes.
He cleans the body cavity with palm
The way
wine.
they said they did it. So we've got a linen covering inside the abdominal
Then,
cavity.
just like the Egyptians, he stuffs the corpse with packets filled with salt and herbs to help it keep its shape. The most crucial step, and the longest, is next,
All right, Ron,
drying the cadaver.
here. I'm going to pour it right here.
Breyer uses natron, the same salt the Egyptians used, to slowly drain the body of its fluids. He piles it all around, 400 pounds of it.
We're okay. Now we have to wait 35 days. Feet look good, don't they?
35 days later, the corpse is almost completely dehydrated.
It's good.
Now, the final step, and the one that truly makes the mummy, the wrapping. Resin pastes hold the linen in place.
The priest would say certain rituals over the body as it was being wrapped. They would pour unguents on the body. Frankincense and myrrh would be used to perfume it.
The ancients used as much as 4,000 square feet of linen. Just as they did, Breyer wraps the fingers and toes one at a time. At last, the mummy, preserved to endure thousands of years, is ready for burial. Unknown Man-E's mummification was radically different. Back at his unwrapping in 1886, the scientists are now halfway through their examination. They already know this is no ordinary mummy. The ancient embalmers never cut open Unknown Man-E to remove his organs, something these men have never seen before. They never stuffed him with natron and herbs. Instead, they covered him head to foot with an unknown chemical. Dr. Fouquet describes its effect on the mummy's skin.
This coating had mixed with the fatty matters of the body and formed a kind of soap.
The examination continues and things get even stranger. It's as if the mummy starts to melt in front of their eyes. The chemical coating begins to react with the air.
The paste that covered him started to thicken as it took on moisture, and one of the records made by Matthew said they all had to overcome a sense of revulsion.
The chemist's tests revealed the substance is not the traditional embalming salt, natron. It's a mixture of natron and a much harsher desiccant, quicklime. The mystery mummy's embalmers had done the unthinkable. Not only had they left his organs inside, they hadn't packed him in natron for 35 days. They'd simply coated his body with lime and immediately wrapped it. It's a violation of everything the Egyptians held sacred. They believed that if your body was destroyed in this life, it could not be magically reborn in the next. And the Egyptians didn't just want their bodies to survive their deaths. They wanted all their material possessions to go with them as well. They even mummified their pets and sacred animals.
Here we have the Falcon Catacombs. You go down these stairs and into a tunnel which leads into a bigger complex of tunnels filled with millions of mummies of different kinds of falcons.
Corridor after corridor, lined floor to ceiling with clay pots containing the bodies of preserved falcons, all of them at least 2,000 years old. Once mummified, the falcon's spirit would rejoin its body, then travel to the world of the gods, just like a human mummy's.
The basic idea would have been the same. By mummifying these animals, they are becoming gods and divine creatures themselves.
The Egyptians sent birds to the afterlife in high style. But Unknown Man-E, it seems, did not deserve the same treatment. And he was not just mummified in a bizarre fashion, he was also denied a name. For an Egyptian, that combination would have had tragic consequences.
If your name doesn't exist, and if your mummy gets brutalized, then you don't exist at all. And that means your afterlife is nothing. And for the ancient Egyptians, having an afterlife was one of the main goals of their real lives.
The Egyptians would never bury a royal in such a disrespectful manner, and possibly ruin his chance of reaching the afterlife, unless they had a good reason. One theory could explain it. It could be he wasn't an Egyptian. Cairo, Egypt, 1886. The mystery mummy's unwrapping continues. The examiners note his blonde hair. They measure him and find he's almost 5'9", tall for an ancient Egyptian. 3,000 years ago, this man would certainly have stood out.
He is not what we would normally consider an Egyptian to look like. There are so many unusual things about this man that you wonder if perhaps he was not an Egyptian, if he came from somewhere else.
If unknown man E was not an Egyptian, he must have been a very important foreigner to be entombed with kings. A search of the ancient annals offers a possible explanation. 1325 BC. Tutankhamun, the boy king, has just died. Fearful of losing status, his wife writes an appeal to the king of the Hittites.
My husband is dead. Send me your son, and I will make him king.
The Hittites were Egypt's rivals to the north. Their king can't refuse the chance to have his son rule Egypt. He sends a young prince named Zenanza to wed Tut's widow. But Zenanza never makes it. He dies soon after arriving in Egypt. It's likely he was murdered. As some see it, the discovery of unknown man E does not open a detective story. It solves one. The mystery mummy, they say, is Prince Zenanza. The embalmers prepared the body not for burial, but for shipment home. They never sent it. That could explain Mani's shroud. The Hittites sometimes buried their dead in sheepskins. It could also explain his blonde hair and hasty mummification. Still, there are no marks of trauma on unknown man E's body. Prince Zenanza's murderers would have had to poison him, smother him, or drown him. Tricky ways to dispatch an enemy. To Salima Ikram, it just doesn't add up.
This is obviously not an entire sheep we have here. And in fact, I feel that perhaps it's not a sheep at all, and the early scholars mistook a goat skin for a sheepskin. The hair is not blonde, as people have reported. It's light brown.
Ikram is not convinced the mystery mummy was a foreigner. That doesn't rule out another theory, that foreigners had a hand in his fate. It could be unknown man E was an Egyptian who died and was mummified elsewhere. In 1500 BC, ancient Egypt is at the height of its power. Its dominions stretch from Syria in the north as far south as Nubia. Perhaps unknown man E is a high official who dies in one of these far-flung territories. The locals mummify him as best they can, then send him back to Egypt for the honor of burial in the Valley of the Kings. But it isn't just unknown man E's mummy that's unusual. His coffin is unmarked, as are his bandages. And there's something else missing: the power of magic. It may be the most important clue to Mani's identity, possible proof that his strange burial was no accident. The Egyptians believed no one could safely navigate the dangerous journey to the next world without magic. Embalmers wrap amulets inside the mummy's bandages to ward off evil spirits. Magic spells the dead will need to navigate the underworld are inscribed all over tombs and coffins, and even on papyri that will accompany the corpse. Every dead royal also receives plenty of magical servants.
These little figures in the shape of mummies are the kind of tomb equipment that unknown Man-E doesn't have, but every Egyptian would want to have.
Egyptologist Robert Rittner suspects unknown Man-E was denied magic on purpose.
These guarantee for you an afterlife without work and without suffering.
The figures would magically come alive in the afterlife and serve the deceased for eternity. If ancient priests purposefully denied unknown Man-E magic servants, they may have denied him the benefit of a proper funeral as well. In a normal burial, the priest utters the spells that will reinvigorate the deceased's 5 senses and bring him back to life. The magic starts to work once he's sealed inside the tomb.
When it's time for the king to wake up, he would rise up out of his sarcophagus and get out of his bed, and then would get the first spell.
The deceased faces a series of tests before he's granted an afterlife. He finds the answers to the tests on the walls around him. It's the world's first cheat sheet.
And then after gathering the magic from the whole room, he is powerful enough to go to this passage which goes out to the north. And that's where he becomes one with the stars and Ahu, one of the great gods.
The deceased would surely fail his tests without the aid of magic. He wouldn't join the gods in the hereafter. He'd be consigned forever to oblivion. Unknown Man-E had no magic servants, no magic amulets to ward off evil, and no magic spells in his coffin to help him navigate the underworld. He was not only nameless, he was powerless.
Unknown Man-E has a complete reversal of the Egyptian idea of what a burial should be. He is an anti-mummy.
Those who buried unknown Man-E certainly knew the consequences. There could only be one reason to treat a dead royal with such disgrace. Our mystery mummy may have been an outcast. The scientists unwrapping Man-E have now been working for 2 days. They're close to determining what killed him. None of them believes he died a natural death. At first, they suspected he was buried alive. Their examination now reveals another culprit. Dr. Fouquet has taken a sample from the mummy's stomach. The chemist tests the contents. There's no sign of food. Dr. Fouquet sees an obvious explanation.
The first impression is this man having been poisoned by a convulsive substance.
Unknown Man-E may have eaten a toxin that forced him to vomit and empty his stomach. He may have been poisoned. Death by poisoning. An anonymous and poorly equipped burial. In ancient Egypt, only a criminal would warrant such an end. But the Egyptians wouldn't keep the body of just any criminal. He must have been a special case. Once again, ancient records suggest an answer. The crime is the worst an Egyptian could commit: regicide, the murder of the king. The criminal is the king's own son. 1153 BC. The pharaoh Ramses III has ruled Egypt with an iron hand for 30 years. Now, in his 6th decade, his grip is weakening. Wars to repel invaders along Egypt's borders have drained the treasury. Unrest is brewing at home. In the religious capital, Thebes, workers have gone without food rations, and strikes have broken out. Within the palace, disgruntled members of Ramses' own family see an opening. They hatch a plot to assassinate him. Egyptologist Susan Redford has investigated the conspiracy.
There was certainly some family disputes going on, very serious family disputes. One of his chief queens, Taya, was obviously very unhappy, discontent that her son wasn't in line for the throne.
Queen Taya is just one of Ramses' wives and concubines. He has dozens. And he's chosen as his successor a son of his chief wife, Isis. Taya has other ideas. She decides to kill Ramses and install her son as pharaoh. His name is Pentawere, and his story sheds an intriguing light on the case of unknown man E. The records don't explain how Ramses dies. Some believe the plotters hid a poisonous viper in his quarters, and the king received a fatal bite. The records do describe the fate of the conspirators. Most are burned at the stake. But not Pentawere. As the son of a pharaoh, he receives a different punishment. He's allowed to commit suicide.
Apparently it was left up to him as to how he would do this, so that he could do it in a way that would not mutilate his body, and he would go into the afterlife intact. The best way to accomplish this, of course, would be to use poison.
The Egyptians knew of a variety of deadly toxins and just how much would kill. Egypt's great queen Cleopatra committed suicide by poison. As legend has it, she let a venomous cobra bite her. The Egyptians also had easy access to lotus, mandrake, and belladonna, or nightshade, all killers when taken in large doses. Dr. Benson Harrer, an expert in ancient Egyptian medicine, thinks he knows which poison Pentawere took: ricin, found in the seed of the castor bean plant.
Pentawere, being interested in something that was sure, fast, and painless, would probably play it safe and grind up 4 or 5 beans.
The castor bean plant is native to Egypt. Its oil, which is poison-free, is used all over the world as a laxative. But its seeds contain one of the deadliest poisons known to man.
If it were purified ricin, the amount in this spec would probably be enough to kill 5 or 6 men. To make it easy to ingest, I could then add a small amount of honey, or perhaps suspend it in a glass of wine or beer.
The ricin would quickly invade every organ of Pentaware's body, but it would do the most damage to his lungs. His cells would stop absorbing oxygen, they would swell and release fluid. He would suffocate within hours. If unknown man E is the criminal Pentawere, why did the Egyptians preserve his body? Other conspirators were denied any chance for an afterlife. They were burned alive, their ashes scattered for others to trample on. But Pentawere, as the son of a pharaoh, had entitlements in death, no matter his crimes in life.
You need to bury members of the royal family, whether you like them, whether you want them to survive into the next world or not. You don't have to bury them well, you merely have to bury them.
Perhaps Pentawere was quickly mummified. No one would have wanted a vile traitor lying around for weeks. Then he was quietly buried. He was given no protective magic amulets. And most important, no name. For an Egyptian, it's a fate worse than death. We do know that Pentawere's name was removed from his father's monuments.
Lacking a name, he has no existence. His power has been short-circuited. This is ensuring that he is helpless and damned forever, with no name, no personality, nothing.
Yet that doesn't completely solve the case. Unknown Man E was found in a tomb with some of ancient Egypt's most powerful pharaohs, including Ramses III. If he is Pentawere, he ended up just feet from the man he tried to kill. Tomb robbers may be to blame for that. At the end of Ramses III's reign, a rash of robberies decimates the Valley of the Kings. The thieves grab anything of value. Their greatest prize? The pharaoh's silver and gold. They even hack apart mummies to get at their magic amulets. The priests who preside over the valley make a radical decision. They have dozens of royal mummies moved to a secret cache. Among them are Ramses III and the mystery mummy we know today as Unknown Man E. In an irony of history, the pharaoh may have come to rest not far from his traitorous son. And there's another irony to the case of Unknown Man E. By the time archaeologists enter the cache, 3,000 years later, robbers have desecrated nearly every mummy. But not Unknown Man E. Is Unknown Man E the disloyal Prince Pentawere? Most now discount one piece of evidence that transfixed early Egyptologists. Man E's agonized look, they say, is common and does not indicate a gruesome death. And we don't really know when Unknown Man E died. Still, a summary of the evidence is intriguing. Unknown Man E was very young when he died. He was likely a royal. His body shows no signs of trauma, and his stomach is empty. Possible signs he was poisoned. And for some reason, Man E was hastily mummified, something rarely seen. He was apparently buried anonymously and without benefit of magic.
The evidence that we have of what would likely happen with Pentawere makes it very likely that he is Unknown Man E. Pentawere was going into the afterworld through a very perilous journey without the protections that were granted to the royals. He was going to be a member of the royal family, but kind of an outcast member.
But others are not so sure. Salima Ikram believes the case may never be solved completely.
Unknown Man E will always remain an enigma for people because he is so outside the norm, and ancient Egypt to a large extent was being within the norm.
Whoever he was, Unknown Man E's treatment would have deeply disturbed a royal Egyptian. With no name and no magic, he would have entered the underworld very insecure, with little hope of reaching the afterlife. He would have become what the Egyptians called an angry dead, a disturbed spirit. That could be why his discovery shocked the men who first examined him. And it could be why the power of his story haunts us still.